Hello. This is the deep dive for Tasukete, the definitive edition. I don't really feel like being on camera today, so enjoy this official Joker artwork that I recolored red. I don't want to waste any time because you fuckers don't watch my content for very long anyway, so let's get right into it. So before I dive into each song, what's the overall theme of Tasukete? Tasukete, the word, as you can probably guess, is Japanese. It translates to help me. So why the Japanese title? Well, for starters, this album is a successor to Kintsugi, my second album. Kintsugi is another Japanese word, so I wanted its follow-up to retain that theme. I went with Tasukete, and I'll tell you why that is when I talk about the title track at the end, as it ties into that. The cover of Tasukete was originally vent art I made about AI art, and it was literally called Frustration, after the Soft Cell song of the same name. For Tasukete DE, I decided to change its direction to that frustration and anger. Tasukete is literally screaming at you because it's being left behind, forgotten, and left to rot. It's an album about feeling forgotten, but being incredibly pissed off about that fact. This is made apparent by the opening track, titled Fuck You.
A bleak ocean moon hangs over still waters, in a sky with no stars, in a sea with no fish.
Fuck You is the first track to lash out with its title alone. I wanted the album's message to be clear with that title. This album is not happy. The original track, For No One to See, was just static and the poem. This time, the track and the poem are struggling, being interrupted by horrible noises and screaming. These horrible noises are two tracks on the album, Meltdown and The Revenge of Track 3. Both of these tracks are the focus of this album. This is all meant to represent what it's been feeling like for me to try and make art for the last 8 months. I've been trying to concentrate on my work, from the disaster archives to my albums to my other art avenues that I've been going down, and to be blunt, the failure of all of these has been kind of driving me mad. I don't want this to turn into me dumping about my recent stressors, that's what I have a therapist for, but a lot of these emotions and feelings were pumped into this album. It's kinda hard not to talk about it, so expect it to come up over the course of the video. So the backstory on the poem. I don't remember exactly what I was feeling when I wrote it, but I remember when I did. It was 2022. I was going to bed at 4 in the morning, horrifically depressed. Imagine, RezDragon depressed. I know, I'm really changing it up. Anyways, at the time, I had just started a new job and it wasn't going great, a running theme of this video. My then co-workers were intentionally isolating me and not speaking to me. I was having a hard time adjusting to the job as well. You could describe my job as blue collar, and it's very tough on your body. I was expected to lift 35 pounds back to back over and over again, and I couldn't keep up. I was feeling really left behind by the people around me at this job, so I wrote a poem about it.
A bleak ocean moon hangs over still waters, in shades of gray, in a sky with no stars, in a sea with no fish. Only its faded reflection to keep it company. Not even a breeze, not even a ripple, just the image of itself, for no one to see.
In this version, I added the menacing thumps that I used in my Best of 2023 because it made the track so much more sinister. This track ends with the first cry for help, before being drowned out by Forgotten. Literally, being drowned out because the protagonist of the album has been forgotten. Forgotten was one of the first songs I played on the original Tasukete. I don't remember what key it's in, I want to say it's D or E. The only thing I remember about it was it being extremely cathartic to play. I had just started production on normal around this time, and it was way too much work that I put on myself. Forgotten kinda helped me release some of that stress. I named it Forgotten because this is the opening track of the album, and again, this is a successor to Kintsugi. Kintsugi's opening song was called Gone, and there's this old saying, gone but not forgotten. Well, in this case, it's gone and forgotten. So you could see this track as being a follow-up to Gone, as that's how I treated while working on it. Forgotten is trying to act like it's okay. It's trying to play you a nice song, but it's so distorted, messy, broken, and harsh. Near the end, a scream comes in, and the song desperately tries to cover up the pain. It tries to hide it until it just can't anymore, and it retreats in an instant. Your Bones was originally called Feast on Your Bones, but I shortened it because both of the songs before it started with F and I didn't want a third. The idea with this track is removing anything that's left of you. The hounds will finish you off and there won't be anything left for people to remember you by. This is actually a good chance for me to talk about a major aspect of all of my work, leaving an impression. I don't remember when this started, I want to say sometime in 2020, but one of my main drives for me making art is that I have something to leave behind when I die. As someone who danced with suicide more times than I'd like, death is inevitable, and for me, it feels like it will be even sooner than I'd wish. The meaning of my life is to make a lasting impression on the world with what little time I feel like I have. I want my work to affect someone the same way I have been affected by others' work. I cannot overstate how important music has been for me in my life, how important art has been in helping me process and release complex emotions. I want to make work that affects people in the same way. I want to speak to the damned, the outcasts, and the forgotten. I want to speak to people like me to let them know that they aren't alone. However, I don't feel like I'm leaving much of an impression upon the world when it appears that my impressions keep getting washed away by the rain, or by someone's power washer. Anyways, Your Bones is just basically a mashup of two Strega sessions, and that's about all I remember from it at this point. Sorry, too much TDA information has pushed a lot of shit out of my head. Slay the Dragon was originally Plight of the Dragon before it got remastered and updated. This is the only quote-unquote normal-sounding song from the original Tasukete that survived the massive cutting. In case you aren't aware, which is probably most of you, the original Tasukete looked like this, and the definitive edition looks like this. When I came back to Tasukete, I was just going to remaster it and cut a few tracks that I couldn't stand. Well, then I just kept cutting until I ended up with something completely different, hence why I call it the definitive edition, when it might as well be called the real version. Anyways, Slay the Dragon's new title is a stab at myself. I am RezDragon after all. The original title pretty much meant the same thing, but like the whole album, I took it in a darker direction. The feral beast continues to scream in the background, being dealt blow after blow, while the music continues to seemingly ignore it. Sins of My Father is back. Oh right, I never really released this outside of my Best of 2022. Sins of My Father was originally one of the opening tracks for Every Once in a While, an album I tried making in 2022 that failed spectacularly. It was an album with too many ideas pulling it, and I just could not get it to work. I really liked this track, however, which is why it made my best of 2022. Well, when I was working on Tasukete DE, I thought about adding synths to the album. I mostly added it to slow down the pacing of the beginning, because without it, I felt like the beginning of the album moved way too fast. I'm an artist who loves a slow build. I really want you to sit and feel my work, which is why projects like Alone at the Edge of the Sea are so goddamn fucking long. In this fast-paced, disposable content world we live in, I have the balls to ask people to sit down and listen to some droning ambience for 10 minutes. And I'll do it again with Horizon. The original Tasukete got Brother put on it, which is another song from Every Once in a While. Sins of My Father and Brother were actually companion tracks. It's why Father is never mentioned in Brother, because the song is meant to be a follow-up to Sins of My Father. I won't get into why I called this track Sins of My Father. Let's just say I don't have a great relationship with my own father. To tie into that album, one of his quote-unquote sins is forgetting about me in really awful ways you wouldn't expect a father to. Everything's A-OK is when we finally get into the meat and potatoes of this album. This is one of the original Tasukete songs that survived the cutting, however I completely rearranged the song in Adobe Audition. I wanted to cut it down from 8 minutes to 5, but I only managed to make it under 7, but that's still better than over 8. But then I hated the drum track because it was awful and slightly distorted, not in a way that I wanted. I added a bass line from Vital, made a much better drum track, and cut back on some of the more unnecessary vocals. I also shaved about 6 or 7 seconds off of the Meltdown at the end of the track. I also discovered a new effect in Audition, Cutting Power, which I use quite a lot on this album. My partner actually suggested adding the harrowing scream to the Meltdown at the end, as I commented that it wasn't fucked up enough. Everything's A-OK is where the album truly starts. The first 4 tracks are all in denial that the protagonist is unhappy. No, everything's fine. Everything's okay. Everything's A-OK is where the album's tone nosedives sharply, and it does not come back up. Everything's A-OK is a sarcastic song at first. The vocals are the protagonist telling people that they're fine, but not because people are asking. The protagonist is putting on a straight face in normal conversation. You know, the classic, I'm okay, when they're clearly not, and you can hear the frustration in their voice. We're all alright over here. Smile to make it disappear. It's killing them to have to constantly keep putting on this straight face over and over again until it all finally breaks apart at the end of the song where the protagonist totally collapses. They've been trying to pretend everything's fine for the last 4 songs, but this is the song where the madness of constantly pretending to be something they're not destroys them into an agonizing 2 minutes of distorted sound and screaming, all winding down into them slipping into total darkness. Yeah, everything's A-OK. I'll just die another day. This line itself is basically saying, I'll die on a day that's less inconvenient for you. This is a good chance for me to talk about another running theme of this album: brutal, raw, honest emotions and how I've been feeling lately. For the last couple months, I've been feeling very depressed, lonely, and isolated. It's been leaving me very frustrated and bitter this time, though, and that's what this album mostly focuses on until we get to I Just Wanted to Tell You I'm Not Okay. I'll be honest, in hindsight, this album is kind of toxic. I've been disassociating pretty hard lately. I've been having more invasive, intrusive thoughts. I've been spending a lot of late nights sitting alone in my office, trying desperately to work on something and only being able to make things like this. I feel like I lied to the people who watched my best of 2023 when I said I felt more confident in myself as an artist. In reality, I've actually been struggling with myself for most of 2023. Alone at the Edge of the Sea nearly killed me, and I mean that literally, which I think I did talk about when I talked about the making of that album. Yes, I did finish the Disaster Archive's first episode, but aside from that and X, I feel like I haven't made anything worthwhile since then. I started 2 albums that I've been having a really hard time getting off the ground, especially State of Agony. Not to mention the absolute lack of inspiration I've been feeling towards TDA's next episode due to the commercial failure of Normal. I got rejected from an art gallery and an art show in the span of 3 months. I've been sending off my work to people for a chance to break out and have received no word back from any of them. I've been promised bigger and brighter things, only for my world to get darker and lonelier. Look, I know you have probably heard this from a dozen or so YouTubers and other artists as of late. 2023 was hard on the arts in general. Everyone has taken a hit, but that also includes us at the bottom of the ladder. I want you to imagine how defeating it feels to hear YouTube channels with over 1 million subscribers, several dozen patrons on Patreon, and with sponsorships are giving up because things are looking bleak for them. How do you think that translates to a small artist like myself? So, let me just take a moment to make something clear that I think a lot of people misunderstand about some of us and maybe even me. I am not rich. In fact, I am very much the opposite of that. I currently only own 2 pairs of pants that I have to switch between for occasions because I can't afford another pair of pants that doesn't disintegrate after 3 months. My work shoes are so worn that they're beginning to hurt my feet and becoming a hazard because of the worn down soles. I can't afford new shoes. I didn't even buy these, someone else had to buy them for me. Some weeks I have to choose between food and gas. Most of the time I choose gas. I use my Patreon funds to pay off the debt I've put myself in to feed myself, but sometimes I still don't get to eat. I spent 2 months in 2022 eating nothing but eggs and cheap ramen. The equipment I use to make my work has arrived to me because of luck. I managed to buy my current computer thanks to stimulus checks during the pandemic, but now it's starting to become out of date. 2 of my keyboards are ones that I was given as a child, and they're low-end, cheaper Yamahas. The other 2 I found at thrift stores. One was even discounted for me because I know the owner. The Strega, the Zero Control, and my Zoom H5 were all gifted to me by a person who put himself into debt to give them to me. I work a day job to pay my bills, and I am good with my money to at least make my bills. And I do this art for 3 reasons. 1, I enjoy it. I have been an artist and a storyteller for as long as I can remember, and it's all I've wanted to do with my life. As a kid, I used to hang up my art in my bedroom and pretend it was a gallery. I used to pretend the stories I made with my toys were TV shows. I've always wanted to do this, and I will do it with whatever tools I have available to me, whether it be music, audio dramas, films, or even machinima. 2, this work helps me cope with my mental illnesses. As you probably can surmise, I struggle with depression to disabling degrees. My current diagnoses are borderline personality disorder or bipolar type 2, even I'm not sure anymore, it keeps changing on me. Depression is just something I have to live with, but I don't like bottling it up inside. My art gives me a place to put it so it feels seen, I feel seen, and I feel less alone. Sometimes. I keep making art in the hopes that one day this will help see someone else through dark times. Sometimes all you need is dark, droning ambience that just lets you feel what you're going through in a safe environment. That doesn't make any of this easy on me, however, especially being a person that struggles with depression. There's only so many times I can make something that represents my soul, pour my very essence into it, and put it out into the world, and watch it get washed away. Watch it get trampled on, ignored, with zero engagement. Keep posting, RezDragon. You can't fall silent for too long, or else the world labels you dead. Make it shorter, make it disposable. I don't have time for you. Your work is too uncomfortable, it's too professional, it's not professional enough. Come back with something better. This is all just useless noise. What is this about? Make it shorter! Make it shorter! Make it shorter! Everything's a-okay. I'll smile to make it disappear. TikTok was actually on the original Tasukete. It was a bonus track, so this is not a new song, and it's actually not commentary on TikTok the app, despite what I just said, because this song predates when I started using TikTok. And yes, I am on TikTok. I'm posting my stuff there. The kids love Alone at the Edge of the Sea, and Brazil really likes marine snow for some reason. But that's all I use it for. I just post in Ghost. I couldn't tell you much on the making of it, as honestly I don't remember anything from it. I know it's a cuckoo clock sample from my Yamaha YTP-200 being torn apart by the Strega. The roaring sounds are vintage dinosaur roars pitched down. They've been recorded onto a cassette and then fed through the Strega. This was just such a dark song that when I heard it again, I decided it needed to be moved out of the bonus tracks and onto the main album. I can see why I made it a bonus track on the original Tasukete, though, as it didn't fit anywhere on that version of the album. This part of the album is what I would like to call the Three Loud Brothers, as TikTok, The Deafening Sound of Silence, and The Revenge of Track 3 are all very loud, unpleasant, and absolutely horrifying. Or as Joel from Vinesauce put it,
Ah, yes, hearing. I remember that.
these have all been mixed to not be horribly unpleasant on the ears from an equalization standpoint, though, I swear. This also begins the true angry part of the album. I wanted my anger to be expressed in the rawest form possible, and what's rawer than a borderline harsh noise wall? Going back to this album being a follow-up to Kintsugi, the original Tasukete never felt like a true follow-up to Kintsugi. Kintsugi is so unapologetically raw, and that raw emotion is pain and grief. There was zero equalization on Kintsugi, mostly because I didn't even know what that was at the time, but I feel like my lack of knowledge works in the album's favor. Kintsugi is primitive, it doesn't know what it's doing, it's shutting down, much like we all do when we're faced with extreme emotions like this. However, it starts screaming to the high heavens that it's not okay to stop the shutdown. Kintsugi's protagonist eventually figures out what to do, which is to travel out to distant lands, and you get the feeling that they're going to make it out okay. Tasukete's protagonist is not. Tasukete's protagonist is more aware, it's more grown up, but it's even more confused, and more importantly, it's frustrated. The middle of this album is the room trashing scene, breaking everything, hurting everyone with its screams, and going mad from what's happening to it, with the scene peaking with the revenge of track 3. It wishes someone would listen, it's crying out for help, but no one can understand what it's saying. Almost like the protagonist is speaking another language. The deafening sound of silence is agonizing. There's no one there. There's no one to listen or even pretend to listen. You just wish someone would speak already. A voice, a cry, anyone. The only sound you can hear is your own thoughts in your head echoing back at you. It's driving you mad. The thoughts in your head turn to static, to mush. You can't think clearly, you wish you had a sound to focus on. There's nothing. The deafening sound of silence is sort of a new track. I say sort of because I didn't play anything new. This was a Strega keyboard session I found in the Tasukete folder that shockingly went unused on the original album. I don't know how or why this got overlooked, but at the same time I have zero memory of playing this, so that's probably why. I believe this is 3 devices. The Strega, because the beginning sounds very Strega to me. My keyboard, if I had to guess, which I think is the Yamaha YTP-200 and its organ voice. And lastly, all of this is being put through a Fangs distortion pedal, as the Strega is not capable of that level of distortion. I completely understand why, if I remembered this at the time, I didn't use this on the original Tasukete. It didn't fit that album's tone at all, but it matches this one perfectly. This is the longest of the 3 Lao brothers, but I wanted to keep these short anyways so they didn't overstay their welcome. The Revenge of Track 3. This track? No. This track 3, from Kintsugi. Track 3 from Kintsugi was one of the first tracks I made for it, and I never could figure out a name for it, so it just got called Track 3 for the longest time until the name just stuck. Track 3 was made by patching up the strega in ways it probably shouldn't have been patched. The Revenge of Track 3 is called that because just before the absolute ballistic rage that this song unleashes into, a similar sound from Track 3 plays. And since this track is also borderline unlistenable like the original, I thought it was a fitting title. This song is just raw anger. I've talked about this many times, but how this song came about was actually an accident. I was testing out some voices with my keyboard hooked up to the strega when suddenly the strega just went absolutely ballistic out of nowhere. There's a dial on the strega called interference, and I had it set to max. I guess it decided to really destroy this signal. It scared the bejesus out of me for sure, but I ended up just leaning into the chaos and playing along, aka changing the voice to a saw lead and slapping my hands wildly all over the keyboard until the chaos suddenly came to a stop. I combined it with another strega session sped up, which I feel like sounds like someone banging their head against something. This is a violent, angry, unpleasant song, and it all disappears as quickly as it came, much like a burst of anger. It tries to soothe itself afterwards with Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, but fails to do so and eventually falls back into darkness, leading into Brother. Brother is the beginning of the collapse. The protagonist is broken, smashed, and destroyed all close to them, and it's still not enough. Something is about to break within them, and Brother is the build-up to that break. There's so much rage and hatred in the protagonist's soul that they cast off their family, a family that clearly wasn't there to begin with. Brother, as I said earlier, is a follow-up to Sins of My Father. This is still one of the most angriest songs I've made, and with good reason. I was very pissed off when I made it. If you haven't guessed by now, I have a rocky relationship with most of my family, like every millennial, I guess. Back in July of 2022, my mother did something that enraged me so badly I smoked a cigarette in less than a minute, and this was when I was still a new smoker. I spent all of the next day working on Brother, fueling all of that anger, hatred, and malice into this track. For the record, I already had the concept of Brother before this happened. This just gave me an excuse to make something dark and horribly loud. Now, I would like to remind the people at home that Brother was the second time I put lyrics to one of my songs, the first being Age of Decaying Empires. I'll be the first to admit that the lyrics to Brother are pretty juvenile. I don't write good lyrics, I'm a much better poet, which is why my lyrics read more like poetry, especially once you get into Alone at the Edge of the Sea. You may be wondering why there are samples of someone else screaming in this. First off, that someone else is RezDragon Rin. She initially recorded these screams for me for Ruina on In Theory, as I wanted someone to join me on that last scream. But because mine and Rin's voices are at similar frequencies, our screams kind of got blended together into a mess, and so I ended up not using them on that song. But I did tell Rin, I assure you, I will find a use for these elsewhere in the future. And I held true to my word, and I used them here in Brother. Rin's screams are so unnatural and uncanny that I knew they'd be perfect for Brother, and this song would not be the same without Rin's harrowing screams. I've also used Rin's screams in Insert New Data and X.
Parting system. Parting system.
The ending of Brother transitions into the centerpiece of the album. Each kick is like a heartbeat, slowly going insane. A horrible noise begins to enter your hearing before suddenly becoming closer. Everything, the entire album before this, builds to this 5 minutes and 47 seconds of terror. It all builds to Meltdown. With a harrowing scream, the protagonists has finally reached their breaking point. They are an absolute mess of emotions. Everything in their brain is currently at an 11 and climbing higher. They can't think straight, they can't see straight, being blinded by their own tears. There's a brief moment of near silence. They can feel their pulse. It's almost taunting them. Despite all of this pain and agony, they are still alive. How can someone in so much pain still be living? They're trying to talk themselves down, but all forms of communication have been reduced to white noise. Their pulse continues. It continues to taunt them. You're still here. The pain is getting worse, but you're still here. You're still suffering, people still hate you, you're still alone. Your screams echoing off the empty room you've created. The pain is unbearable. Someone needs to put you out of your misery. There's no one to do it for you. You have to do it yourself. You can't. Meltdown wasn't made for Tasukete. It was something I made while working on songs for Horizon and was originally called I Hate You. I posted it to Tumblr shortly after I made it because at the time it didn't have an album to call home. It didn't belong on Horizon, and it certainly didn't belong on State of Agony either. This track was just too raw and furious for either of those projects. Again, I'd been feeling very frustrated and angry around that time. I sat down and decided to see if I could pump those feelings into tracks for Horizon, which I did. I made a track I haven't finished yet called Home, as well as some other stuff. So for a few weeks, I Hate You existed as a vent track that I wasn't sure where to put. I did massively shorten it though, as the original session went on for 8 minutes, and I wasn't about to have another clip her wings on my hands. When I was working on Tasukete DE, I thought about including I Hate You because I felt like its raw presentation fit the album, and it did, but it certainly took a lot of tinkering to get it to work. It's not that it didn't belong in the album, it's just that I felt like I could do more with it, but anything I added took away from the synth, which I didn't want. I wanted the synth to remain the focus. What I ended up doing to make I Hate You more complex was I added hi to it. Hi was one of the first tracks I made with the Strega. It was also massively unpleasant to listen to, so I changed its speed to tone it down to match I Hate You synth. I Hate You synth, by the way, is the Yamaha PS25 with the Strega. I call this combination Pulse because these two sing so beautifully together. The PS25 only has 10 built-in voices, being a very early digital keyboard from the 80s. But with the Strega, I feel like it truly unlocks the sound potential from this machine. I've used this combination on State of Agony, A Safe Place, Can't Get It Right, the aforementioned Home, and of course Pulse, and here on Meltdown. For the original I Hate You, I simply held the highest C on the keyboard and just used the transpose dial to alter the pitch as needed. The keyboard also has a pitch wheel on the back of it that I used in conjunction with this to distort the sound, and then I further distorted the sound with the Strega. With Meltdown, like I said, I tried a lot of things that simply didn't work. I tried adding vocals that distracted from the synth too much, I tried making a beat which felt wrong, I added extra sounds that were distractingly bad. Eventually, I thought I might have to cut the track entirely as it wasn't working. And then I screamed. I wanted to record some new screams for 2024 to use in other projects for Everything's A-OK, and to try to use them in Meltdown, which was not called that yet. It didn't get that name until literally 2 days before I released the album. I recorded as many screams as my voice could handle and just used all of them for Meltdown, and my voice is still hurting after doing that, and it's hurting even more as I'm getting deeper into this fucking script. That's when the track really came together and became the scream of pain that I wanted it to be. I felt a little unsure about this track, though. This, of all tracks, was the track I was hesitant to release because I thought people would think there was really something wrong with me this time. Didn't have that thought while I was working on that sinking feeling. It wasn't until I showed the album to my friends and both of them said Meltdown was their favorite track that I stopped thinking that. And sometimes it feels good to listen to a song that is nothing but you screaming at the top of your lungs to unhealthy degrees to help you get through the day. After Meltdown, we have what I call a cool-down track. I give the audience time to take in what they just experienced before moving on to the next part of the album. Kintsugi's cool-down track is The Next Day. Tasukete's cool-down track is 988. If you haven't figured this out by now, 988 is the number you dial for the suicide hotline now. In this track, there's a rumbling noise in the background as the protagonist tries to call someone, again, desperate for help. Nobody answers, however, as the phone just continues to dial over and over again. I kinda came up with this idea as a reference to how it's felt with my own experience in contacting suicide prevention services. I would say, out of all the times that I have contacted them, which I've mostly only done in 2023, there was really only one person that I spoke to out of probably the 6 times that I contacted them. There was only one person that I spoke to that truly felt like they actually helped get me out of depression and suicidal ideation and genuinely made me feel better. The suicide hotline has kind of been hit or miss for me, and that's kind of what I wanted this track to represent, that even services that are meant to help people like me, they're sometimes not as helpful as they seem. There was one person who I just wanted somebody to talk to, and I straight up told them that. And all they did was check to make sure I wasn't suicidal, and then ditched me. The low rumbling in the background is just the Strega. I left it unequalized to retain its texture. The phone dialing noise I recorded myself, but not with my Zoom. My Zoom actually can't be near any cell phone or it starts picking up interference from it. So to record this phone dialing noise, I used a recently purchased Sony Memo recorder. I bought this to use during my field research for TDA's next story, as I don't like writing while the car is moving, and I had to do most of my research from a moving car. But it does come in handy as an emergency microphone as well. Also, side note about showing this album to my friends, I don't think I will ever forget G-Slayer's reaction to 988 when she realized what those numbers meant. The shock and horror in her voice said so much to me. Nobody answers the protagonist. They're still left alone with their thoughts as the rain begins to pour outside. They've broken down, they've smashed everything, their mind is in pieces, and they are alone in tears. Despite their constant pleas, no one answers, and they start thinking no one will. They just wanted to tell you that they were not okay. That's all they wanted to say, and yet no one would listen. They cannot free themselves from this pain. This is a song that is really hard for me to put into words what it means. I talked about this on Patreon when I posted the vocals by themselves, but I just wanted to tell you I'm not okay, was how I was feeling at the end of 2022. 2022 was also a hard year for me, not as hard as 2021 or 2023, but not fun regardless. I spent most of it unemployed. I was unable to find a job for 3 months and was forced to crawl back to the one I walked out of in 2021. Not the same place, though, different location. I eventually left that job again for a job with better hours. However, I only got to work there for less than a month before I was suddenly laid off out of nowhere and never contacted again. For 3 months, I was jobless again and I could not find work. Every place I applied to ghosted me or took 2 months to contact me. I couldn't even go back to my previous job because of stupid reasons, and I was stranded without money, and it's why I ate nothing but eggs and cheap ramen around this time. There was something else going on too that I don't want to talk about publicly. Let's just say that it's what Alone at the Edge of the Sea is about, and we'll get to that one. Out of desperation, I applied for the job that I have currently, which was a job I wasn't sure I was well suited for, but I didn't really have a choice, and I stayed for the money. This is a job with an incredibly high turnover rate, so most of the established folks there don't talk to the newbies, because most of them are gone the next day. I've dealt with this before at my previous job, but I still at least had some people who would talk to me, mostly older women. Not here, because it's mostly men. Nobody would talk to me. Everyone gave me the cold shoulder. I was left alone to figure things out that I had no knowledge on. Some people flat out avoided me. Some people purposely alienated me because I did something that upset them unintentionally. Some people told the rest I was a bad person because of this. My mental health took a beating from this. I lost my cool in front of a manager one day, and this manager was hesitant to talk to me for 5 months afterwards, even admitting to me later that they thought I was crazy. I was falling apart by November. The sheer isolation from this new job, from things going on elsewhere, and from just how shitty 2022 was to me in general, left me very broken by the end of the year, which is how Tasukete got started. I Just Wanted to Tell You I'm Not Okay was one of the first songs I made for it. It's the flute voice on my piano being put through the Strega, but with very light settings. I was mostly using it for delay and pitch bending. I wanted the flute to sound like the person playing was having a hard time keeping it together, and as that's where I was around that time. The vocals came much later. These also have the credit of being the only vocals I've done that aren't high-passed or heavily distorted with pitch changes. This is because I wanted them to be as real as possible, like I'm right there in front of you. I also redid them for Tasukete DE, not because I thought there was anything wrong with the previous vocals, I think they're fine, but because I wanted them to match the new desperate tone the whole album had. I have been feeling similar emotions of isolation as of late, as I've already stated multiple times. Returning to Not Okay was very difficult because it still stings. It still reflects how I feel, which I put that feeling into the new vocals. I just wanted to tell you that I'm okay. I don't know if anyone is listening to me. I hope they get this message. I rearranged this song in Audition, mostly because I wanted the rain to start before the flute this time. And I also changed that rain sound effect to one that had less birds in it, which makes the track feel more empty and alone. It's a recording that I got myself during our thunderstorm season we had this last spring. I don't know if anyone is listening to me, but I hope they get this message. This is a comment about how my work seems to fail to reach a wider audience. The last bit about they say when it rains, it pours is because I was talking to someone at work about how crap 2022 was for me. And his response was, "Damn, they say when it rains, it pours." So I included this in the song, but added, "I would just like to know when it stops," which I think is what I said in response to him. The song is also directed at someone in particular. Someone else is the protagonist coming to terms with the fact that no one is listening, no one is coming, and they better get comfortable with the sound of silence. Or in this case, the rain. This song is the protagonist trying to comfort themselves on their own, but not really succeeding at that. The two synths take turns trying to console one another, but to no avail. It's a sad, slow, painful dance the protagonist does with themselves, left with their destruction and agony as its only friends. If only they were someone else. If I was someone else, I would be enjoying this, almost got to say on the album. And it technically still is on the album, it's just been remixed. The original, to me, feels a bit more hopeful in its tone, and for the end of the album, I wanted this to be dour, dark, and have zero hope, so I redid the song in Audition. I took both of the original synths and knocked them down a few octaves to make them darker, as well as a bunch of other editing. So these are the same synths from the original, just heavily edited to be darker. I also removed the computer noises, wanting to really emphasize the loneliness and isolation of this track. To me, the Lorne-style synth sounds like wind coming from an empty void, and that's what I wanted this track to feel like. Empty. No hope. No light. Nothing. It is the calm after the storm, but it's a calm that comes at a cost. It's the longest track on the album, the only track I let breathe for as long as it wanted. The protagonist has come to realize that no help is coming, but they're still unable to accept it, so they try one last time to ask for help, being more direct this time. However, their ask for help still falls on deaf ears and no one responds, and the protagonist can't figure out why. Maybe if I'm louder, they say. Maybe if I scream. Maybe this all isn't even real. Maybe I'm dreaming. They're right in front of you. The protagonist starts getting desperate. They start begging, pleading for you to listen, not understanding why you can't hear them. They start breaking again. They're gonna collapse again. It hurts. It hurts so much. Why isn't anyone listening? And then it all disappears. The listener pulls the plug on the audio, not wanting to hear the mental collapse of the protagonist again. The listener returns to their own vapid, meaningless life, represented by the light sound of shuffling of an office break room. Life goes on, despite the protagonist. Tasukete, the title track, was a very last-minute track on the original Tasukete, and certainly deserved a better album, which it finally got. Funny enough, but I was actually feeling pretty good about myself when I wrote this and made the song. This was around the time that my job was finally turning around for me, and I was starting to really like it. I managed to funnel some darkness into this track, however, but I couldn't tell you what the emotions were at this point. I don't remember, and I made this song so quickly that I don't even think I had time to remember. I do most of my audio work just before I have to go to my day job because I spend the entirety of my shift listening to what I made, and then I go home and I make more adjustments. It gives me a lot of time to sit with the album and really feel it out. I'm an album artist. I like making long, complex concept albums. The problem is that listening to these works all the way through is very time-consuming, but that's what I do at my day job to keep myself shifted towards my work. When I was putting together the title track originally, I had approximately 10 minutes to record the vocals before I had to leave for work. So I recorded a draft take, but I ended up liking the draft so much I used it for the final song. There's no way I could redo that gut-wrenching please and still have it have the same impact. So back to what I said at the beginning, why this album is called Tasukete. It's because this album is asking for help in another language. Art, I realized, is another language for me. While I feel I can communicate my emotions fine when I'm of sound mind, once the depression sets in, I turn nonverbal and I shut down. Art is the only way I know how to communicate in those moments. It's why I make so much vent art and vent works. It's me trying to communicate how I'm feeling. Tasukete's cry for help being in another language is precisely the album's entire message. This album is asking you for help, but unless you know Japanese, you wouldn't know it unless I told you. On the original Tasukete, I didn't want to outright say this as I felt it took away why the album's title was in Japanese, and why the title track keeps saying Tasukete over and over again. It's literally saying help me again and again, but most English-speaking Americans, where I operate from, wouldn't know that. And like I said, I mostly chose Japanese to follow up from kintsugi, and I seem to have a thing with giving my works or characters Japanese names. Sosasuru is also Japanese. It means to manipulate. For the definitive edition, I wasn't going to change the title track, even though I felt like it could have been taken down an octave to keep up with the album's dark tone. However, when I was listening to the definitive edition at work, my Bluetooth earbuds cut out near the end of the title track. It was only for a second, but it gave me the idea to have the end of the title track start glitching out and failing. And that was the darkness that this track needed to match the rest of the album. I got the idea pretty late to have the track just hard cut at the end. I wanted it to represent what it feels like when I try to show people my work. A lot of people pass over my work or can't listen to it because they see it as horror, and on some level it kind of is, and on other levels it's not. Alone at the Edge of the Sea I do classify as ocean horror, since it's a dark ambience affair about the ocean, and it takes that idea to make something very dark. Tasukete and Kintsugi, however, I don't classify as horror because it's not trying to scare you. It just wants to show you what it's feeling. Think of these albums as being horrible, disfigured monsters, and they just want to come out to the light for a moment for you to see them. But when they do, they are met with gasps of horror and disgust. They get angry, they lash out, before retreating back into the shadows, only spoken about in harsh whispers. That's how I see most of my work, even the horror stuff. Well, if you want the average person to start watching and liking your work, stop making horror, stop making it so uncomfortable. I would. Believe me, I would. God, I wish I could stop, but what else have I got? If I did that, it would take away what I enjoy about my work. Just sugarcoat it and make it easy to swallow. No. I can't bring myself to do that. That feels like I would be lying to myself, much like how this album starts. Just pretend I'm okay, make something happy while my insides are rotting. Just make something average, and it'll take away the nearly 30 years of loneliness and being shunned away from others. Just make something happy, Rez. I would love to. I would love to make something that brings people joy, but even when I do, it's still called horror. It's still scary, it still frightens people. It's still a monster. So, why should I? If nobody wants my work when I try to make nice things, then I'll just make what I want, and what I want to make is me screaming into a void for 2.5 minutes. What I want to make is the sounds of me violently drowning. I want to make what my soul sounds like from years of depression, anxiety, pain, and being the outcast among the outsiders. Just to get it out. So maybe I can live for one more day. I share it so maybe I can feel less alone. Maybe somebody out there feels the same way I do. I thought I found that someone a few years ago, but I lost them, and that's how we got Kintsugi. I'm still searching for that someone, for anyone, to end the deafening sound of silence. Tasukete Definitive Edition, as I said, is a toxic project. It's all my worst intrusive thoughts as of late being given a place to roam free and feel angry. My work lately has been focused on being alone with no one listening, which I know isn't entirely true. Alone at the Edge of the Sea actually did pretty well for my numbers. It's my best performing album, TikTok loves it, and it's the only album on my Bandcamp that gets streams occasionally. Logically, I know I am not alone. My emotions don't know that, though, as that's not what they've been trained to handle. And the result of this is this album that I have given you. A small little red creature twitching with agony, its mouth open to scream. This is Tasukete, an album about feeling forgotten and being very angry about it. Thank you for listening to my bitter memoir about this. If you want more of these about my other works, let me know. They'll be less bitter than this, I promise. I will be doing one of these for Alone at the Edge of the Sea next. Not a making of, as I already covered that. Alone at the Edge of the Sea does have a plot that I think most people missed, and I do want to talk about that in detail. Well, if you stuck around for this long, you can check out the album itself if you haven't listened to it, and if you have, and you've listened to this, why don't you go ahead and check out Alone at the Edge of the Sea. Thanks for stopping by.